There you go, 21st Century Digital Boy by Bad Religion. Kind of fitting for this final lecture of the social media module, which I've called Social Media Futures, but really what I want to concentrate on in it is not so much the future of social media, but the critical present in a lot of ways and the movement that is emerging against social media, and that's something I want you to really think about for your critical reflective essays, which is part 2 of the assignments for this module. Well, in the context of, I'm going to give you a set of arguments in this lecture which will encourage you to reject social media. And what I want you to think about with these arguments is really how you might argue against them yourselves. Social media is a critical part of our everyday lives. It's a critical element of everything that we do in contemporary society. And from 20 years ago of having really no social media at all to it becoming a fundamental part of everyday existence is an incredible development, an acceleration of critical media infrastructures that has been not seen previously in the history of media development. If you don't media history with me last year, you'll know, that a lot of the inventions and the innovations in media, even in the electronic media age, took a long time to take hold, and social media has taken hold in an incredibly important way, in a far faster manner. So I'm going to briefly look at some social media failures. I'm going to assess the future of social media based on this model, review the module a little, and then the key really stuff that I want you to concentrate on from this lecture is 10 reasons for deleting your social media accounts, which is literally the name of a book that came out last year by Jaron Lanier. It's in the reading list, obviously, for this module, and it's an incredibly important book, even if you don't agree with Lanier, that just to engage with his arguments is very, very important. So, social media failure. Let's have a look at the history of failures of social media. Friends Reunited, Friendster, Bebo, MySpace, GoWalla, MSN Messenger, Google+. Good effort, Google, you suck. All these sites, I mean, if you don't know who that is in the image, that's Tom, who was the first friend you always got if you signed up for a MySpace page. I think most of you in this are too young to remember MySpace, but some of you might have had a MySpace page. I mean, Friends Reunited was probably in the UK at least one of the first social media experiences, launched around about the turn of the century, based around your educational history. So you would join a particular group based on the school you went to or the college you went to, and you posted up a very basic profile with a photograph and a bit of a bio of what you were doing now, and it allowed one-to-one communication so you could get back in touch with people. It sucked, and if you're anything like me, then you left school at 16 because you couldn't stand the people there anymore, and what was the point of going on a social network that you actually reconnected with the people you wanted to leave just a few years earlier? Yeah, I wasn't really into it. Friendster is more of a precursor to the social media networks that we understand today. So very much similar to Facebook in terms of its structure. Yeah, kind of primitive looking. Didn't really get the traction of numbers. Bebo was aimed more towards young people, children in particular. Sort of had its blossom in between around 2005 to about 2008, sort of 2009, got swept away by Facebook in the end. So did MySpace. MySpace was huge for a couple of years, right? MySpace between 05 and 08 was absolutely massive, but then got absolutely smashed by the juggernaut that is Facebook. GoWalla was what we call a location-based social network, which is what I did a lot of research on in my early part of my academic career, writing about location-based social networks. one of these sites where you could check in your location, so you could share with friends and anyone in the network where you were at that particular point in time. Bought by bought by Facebook in 2012, and that's basically the check-in function on Facebook is taken from Goala. MSN Messenger, oh my God, MSN Messenger. When I was a much younger man, when I had hope, when I hadn't been crushed by life, MSN Messenger was the bane of my existence. I was a college lecturer at the time, FE lecturer teaching A-levels, and trying to get kids to do any work for their A-levels when MSN Messenger was a thing was just virtually impossible. People would spend hours and hours and hours on it. An instant messaging service, these days, WhatsApp does the same thing, even Facebook Messenger does the same thing to an extent, but its reach was huge. Again, in that period, probably up to about 2011, something like that. Again, it kind of got swept aside by Facebook in the end. I think Google Plus was Google's shameless attempt to try and replicate Facebook itself. And it failed completely. Now, if we look at Google Plus is an interesting example here of social media failure. Why would something like Google Plus fail so badly? Trying to compete with Facebook in terms of functionality, really tried to do the same thing that Facebook was doing, but lacked one critical aspect: numbers. And you can look at all of these sites, all these social networking sites, and it all really boils down to one thing. Facebook, the juggernaut, came along and outdid them for numbers, and they basically fell into failure itself because of those lack of numbers. Now, what's remarkable about that situation is not that these things failed, it's that nothing has been able to take Facebook down in the meantime. Facebook's been the predominant social network now for 12 years, and I know it's probably less popular with your generation than it is with older generations, almost undoubtedly so, in fact. But of course, Facebook has aggressively maintained its position thanks to its acquisitions of other services like WhatsApp, like Instagram, and built itself into a behemoth that doesn't look like it's going down anytime soon. The history of social media in its early days was all about trial and error, and these incremental changes in the social networking space itself. But these things legitimately failed. They failed because of numbers and numbers and numbers. MySpace is a remarkable failure in that sense. It was sold to News International, Rupert Murdoch's company, back in 2007. And within a year or so, it had just collapsed because people had migrated to Facebook. Not because it was News International that owned it, but because Facebook gave a different kind of experience. A more refined, more streamlined social networking experience, and captured a zeitgeist around that time which the other sites just couldn't get hold of, and has basically been a behemoth which has been able to steamroll all opposition to it over this period of time. The remarkable aspect of it is that it keeps going, and it keeps growing, and it keeps getting bigger, and it keeps getting richer, and it keeps getting more effective at what it's doing, including its business model based around data harvesting. These companies in particular, with the exception, you could argue, of Google Plus, these companies were naive to the business element of social media. They didn't capitalize on the data that was rolling in through the provision of their services, which meant effectively that their services never capitalized on user behavior, which we could argue is a good thing, but at the same time, it meant that they were very, very vulnerable to a company like Facebook coming along and crushing them, not just in terms of user numbers, but in terms of economics too. So, looking into the future, if there's a history of failure in social media, is there going to be failure in the future? It's actually quite difficult to see the social networking sites we have today failing at any time in the future, really, unless we all stopped using them. The only way Facebook or a company like it goes down is if people migrate away from that service into something else. Even with falling numbers amongst Generation Z, it doesn't seem to be the case. It doesn't seem to be happening. Facebook is holding up just fine. So without people leaving, it's going to still be here. I mean, if there's a sort of evolution of how social media moved over time, if you look here, the grey dots are MySpace users and the blue dots are Facebook users. You can see by 2011, Facebook is huge compared to MySpace. It basically ran and overtook it. So 2005 News Corp buys out MySpace, and it grows a little. You get the emergence of internet celebrities in 2006 on the MySpace platform. 2007, you start to get MySpace controversies. 2008, Paul McCartney and Guns N' Roses launched their albums on MySpace. My God, Guns N' Roses album from 2008 was called Chinese Democracy, because the idea was that actually that album would never come out. You'd be more likely to have democracy in China than that album come out. 2009, 90,000 sex offenders removed from MySpace, and you start to see at that point a switch over. MySpace is now a social entertainment destination in 2010. Its numbers are collapsing. In 2011, it loses all its staff. We see evolution over time, but 2011 is interesting in that context. The evolution has kind of ground to a halt since then. We are still pretty much in the same service space for social media as we were then. We see new services come and go over time. We do see buzz around certain things. We're seeing it around TikTok at the moment. Whether TikTok survives more than a couple of years is debatable. If you can integrate that functionality into something that Facebook offers, or if Facebook can offer an alternative to it, maybe TikTok goes down eventually. So, in terms of the evolution of social media, we've reached kind of a grinding halt of evolution, which is kind of depressing, really. And we probably need to reflect on that. We're going to be using the same services now in the next few years as we have been for a long time. It's an odd situation. You expect media to evolve, and when we've seen with digital media, we see very rapid evolution of things. That evolution has seemed to have just held its place with regards to social media, which is very, very weird. Bit of a brief module review. What is the social media culture? Remember, the module title is social media culture, so I'm just going to quickly whiz through how we can think about culture. Participatory culture, big idea that we've been talking about really from week one, I suppose. Debatable. The extent to which we participate on social media can only really be appreciated if we consider that our social media cultures are controlled by algorithms, they're controlled by companies, they're controlled by platforms, they're controlled by platform economics. So our participation is always mediated by the platform itself for the platform's own aims and objectives, which are corporate in nature. So participatory culture, yes, we do participate in social media culture, but our participation is always mediated by what goes on with regards to the business model of the company. The social itself has been remediated, though that's undoubtedly true. We rely on social media for so many of the basic functions of being social human beings at this point in time, that it's become an integral part of what it is to be a social animal, in effect. There are new forms of expression of the self with it, and I'm obviously alluding to the work of Irving Goffman at this point. And we can express ourselves in different ways through social media. Excuse me. That is blackcurrant squash, by the way. That is not like Strongbow dark fruits or anything. I'm not doing this while drinking heavily. So there are new forms of expression of the self, and I'm hoping that you guys are reflecting on those forms of expression in your assignments as well, because that's very, very important. Privacy has obviously been altered to the extent to which a privacy no longer exists in any meaningful sense. We are still private individuals, but social media has integrated so much with our lives, it has destroyed the idea of a private sphere. The kind of surveillance that we are subject to as social media citizens is not overt, like a Foucauldian system of discipline. It's much more a system of control and a system of nudges and winks, a la Gilles Deleuze. We are constantly surveilled and constantly monitored by these applications for the production of data to be sold. Alternatives are extremely difficult, as we saw in the social media alternatives lecture. Any attempts to break the business model or any attempts to break away from the dominant social media providers have failed. And that really comes down to numbers. It's critical mass issues. These companies cannot get enough people onto their systems to make them viable. Emotions are now subject to the logic of social media. This is something I talked about at length in the social media and nihilism lecture, but our constant up and downs of everyday life, the dopamine rushes that we get through social media, basically modulate our behavior and modulate our emotion through the day. Therefore, social media is not just something which is mediated social, it is mediated the experience of being a human being effectively, which is very, very important for us to understand. Not done the VR lecture because obviously we're not around to actually experience it, but if VR takes off, what I can tell you is that it will intensify the current situation, because the aim of companies involved in social media and why they're investing really, really heavily in VR is to try and create virtual worlds that they control completely for our experience. It's frightening. If you want to talk more about it, get in touch with me. And protest is possible, but only from within the system. So we looked at this in the protest lecture. You know, we can use social media for social protest, but the extent to which we're allowed to do that and the effectiveness of that is all down to the social media companies themselves and how they allow us to express protest. So, wow, I just summed up the entire module in 5 minutes. Check me out. Deleting social media. This is really what I want to get into. This is my one of my intellectual heroes, actually, Jaron Lanier. Jaron Lanier was a huge pioneer of virtual reality in the 1980s and in the 1990s, and has become one of the most forthright critics of digital media companies that there is. His seminal work, You Are Not a Gadget, came out in around 2011, and it's a very, very important book. But this book, he wrote a very short book in 2018 called 10 Reasons to Delete Your Social Media Accounts Right Now, is really forthright invective about the position of social media in our everyday lives, and he really puts forward a persuasive argument as to why we should delete our social media accounts. Facebook, according to Jaron, is a bummer. So is Google, so are Instagram and Twitter and Snapchat and even WhatsApp. And what he says is they are all based on the bummer system, which is behavior of users are modified and made into an empire for rent. It's got a lovely way with words, Jaron Lanier, and probably need to unpack this empire of rent bit for you. But basically, behavior of users are modified and made into empire of rent. What he's saying is that social media modifies our behavior and then sells it. It's that simple. It changes us as people and then uses us as a product. These are kind of arguments that I've been making all the way through this module. So, how does Lanier set out this argument? So when you use social media in general and Facebook and Google in particular, you are not a customer, you are a product. And I've been trying to make that argument with you guys really since the first year. People are paying to manipulate your behavior on the basis of statistical probabilities that you cannot see and they cannot understand. Nobody needs to know why you are more likely to buy X or vote Y if you've just seen a cat video or a news item that makes you feel sad, but mathematically speaking you are, so that's what the system will show you. So Lanier's view here is that these systems have become so algorithmically dependent that even the people who've put them together no longer understand what's happening. The algorithms are running mad, and every time you see something, it triggers an algorithmic response to try and sell you something. The systems understand your behavior in ways that other people can't even understand that behavior, and they trigger off reactions in it to try and keep you involved and to keep you consuming over that period of time. You have no say in this, you have no understanding of this, therefore you are being manipulated without your knowledge, and you are being manipulated in highly sophisticated ways which change your way of behavior. So that, for Lanier, makes it very different from traditional marketing, which companies try and persuade you to vote to buy something or to vote in a particular way. And of course, those of you who are doing PR will understand these things really well. The traditional PR rulebook is out of the window, though, because the kind of fine-grained behavioral analysis that's going on here based on your data trails is far more sophisticated than anything that a PR agency could ever come up with. So Facebook and Google work by manipulating your emotions, information networks, friendship, communication, awareness of news, and social behavior in order to make it you more statistically likely to buy X or Y. Well, that is pretty severe stuff, right? I mean, that is pretty brutal. What Lanier does in the outset of in setting out his argument is make an argument that we are under the control of systems that we barely understand, and that the companies themselves barely understand. It's got out of hand even for them now. They don't understand the workings of the very systems they are using to control our behavior. So, the 10 reasons why. Number 1. You are losing your free will. So this is pretty severe. Bummer is Pavlovian. I think I used Pavlov in a lecture the other week. So the Pavlovian idea, when he says bummer is Pavlovian, he's referring to classical conditioning response, that basically we are conditioned to do things by social media without our knowledge as basically as a stimulus response sort of mechanism. So social media prompts you to do things by triggering responses that you and it, of course, since the whole thing is a machine, are entirely unaware of. Lanier uses this quote: would you trust a hypnotist who is working for unknown third parties, who apparently billions of people do? Lanier's argument here is that we have undergone a process of radical classical conditioning through using social media. We do things unthinkingly. It even goes, even that response that we have, and I'm sure some of you are going to mention this in your projects, that when we're bored, the first thing we do is pick up our phone and open Instagram. We do it unthinkingly. We do it without circumspection. We do it without even considering what that activity is. Lanier's argument is that those kind of Pavlovian responses have been conditioned in us by social networks, and this continual prompting to do things, to like things, to comment on things, even without any kind of reflection on what we're doing, is incredibly difficult, and we're losing our free will, basically. We are part of this never-ending data machine that churns onwards and onwards and onwards. Here's a point. Here's a definite point. We do, look, I do the same. When I'm when I've got 2 minutes when I'm not doing anything, what's the first thing I do? I open Twitter. Yeah, I start liking things on Twitter. I start reading things that I'm not necessarily interested in, but I'm in there. It's a Pavlovian response for me. There's a stimulus, and I give it a response. Argument number 2. Quitting social media is the most finely targeted way to resist the insanity of our times. Ooh, a lot to unpack in that, right? So firstly, the insanity of our times. So Lani is making a very strong point here that there's something radically wrong with the world today and the way that we act in the world. That, something insane is going on. And what he's really referring to here is the fact that it's like the argument that Sherry Turkle made, and I mentioned Turkle in the lecture on Monday. We're alone together. We are constantly glued to our phones, to our devices. It's creepy. We are in little bubbles of virtual space all over the place. These are the insanity of our times. The scheme I'm describing amplifies negative emotions more than positive ones, so it's more efficient at harming society than improving it. This is a very, very, very strong point being made here. And strong, I mean, not necessarily in terms of the evidence for it, although there is significant evidence, of course, that social media does harm us in terms of emotions. I've posted a lot of papers up, particularly in the selfies lecture section on Blackboard, around this element, and it's become a hot topic of like Instagram and mental health recently, but we can extend that out to all the social networks at this point. What Lani is tapping into here is that, and I talked a lot about this again in the nihilism lecture back in week 4. Social media is designed to make us sad. You know, that is the title of Geert Loving's book that I took a fair bit of that lecture from, Sad by Design. Social media is there to make us sad, and our anxieties and our depression and our general mood in life is conditioned by social media, because that makes us into more pliant and more obedient users of social media, which is more helpful for the customers of social media, which is the advertisers. So social media is actually more efficient at harming our mental health than it is at improving our mental health. And because of that, the most effective way of getting out of it is to quit social media. If we quit social media, we'd feel better, is Lanier's argument. There's a problem with it that if I as an individual quit social media on my own and everyone else stayed on it, I'm not sure if I'd feel any better. In fact, I'd probably be dragged right back into it. So there is a problem there. What he's talking about is like a mass quitting at this point. If we all got off it and went back to actually talking to one another, we'd actually be better off for it. Argument number 3. I mean, this couldn't be more blunt if we tried. Social media is making you into an asshole. The main reason for using social media is addiction. You get a dopamine hit every time you are shared or liked. That can breed dependence, arrogance, excessive confidence in your rightness, exaggeration, imbalance, pandering, ignorance, rudeness, narcissism, and at the very worst point of humanity, Donald J. Trump. And he does use Trump in this argument as well. The point being here that the very mechanism that keeps us addicted to Facebook, the dopamine hit that we get when we get likes on social media, when we get recognition on social media, when something we do go viral, when we get, you know, a bit of attention for what we're posting, that mechanism encourages the kind of behavior which we should not be exhibiting as human beings. Dependence on social media, arrogant behavior, excessive confidence in our rightness against all evidence, exaggeration, imbalance, pandering, ignorance, rudeness, narcissism. And you just have to go onto Twitter for more than 10 minutes to see what all of these things are. You know, it's a swamp of all this stuff. I think he's taking specific aim at Twitter with some of this, obviously with the Donald Trump link as well. If social media is making us into an asshole, then maybe we should think about quitting it, because we don't want to be assholes, right? Worth thinking about. Number 4, social media is undermining truth. So we're all familiar with the idea that we live in a time of fake news, that, you know, the information that we get out there now is not to be trusted, and that social media plays a mechanistic role in the spreading of fake news. When people are fake, according to Jaron, everything becomes fake. Bots, shitposts, fake accounts, Photoshop memes, scare stories, clickbait. Bummer doesn't care whether these things are true. It only cares whether things garner and retain attention or engagement. Paranoia turns out, as a matter of course, to be an efficient way of corralling attention. It's a really good quote at the end. The more paranoid they are, the more you're paying attention to this stuff, the more valuable you are. The mechanisms of social media don't take into account truth or falsehood. Those are values which are not important to social media in any way, shape or form. All that's important is engagement. So lies, falsehoods, you know, complete fakeness, that isn't those values are not important. And Lanier's obviously tapping into things around, you know, Donald Trump's election, but also Brexit in 2016 in this country, and, you know, a huge number of other issues as well. Those are the two that usually stick out in mind, but you know, this is a daily occurrence. And what Lanier's trying to argue here is that these things are inherently dangerous. You know, this undermines democracy. This undermines the value of truth in society. What's the product of this? The product of this is Donald J. Trump. We have an out-and-out liar in charge of, you know, the biggest country in the world. And in this time of incredible crisis on the planet, do we really want Donald J. Trump in charge of America when America's got to show leadership, and America, we're going to have to depend as a planet on American innovation and American pharmaceuticals to get out of this virus. And the president of America is Donald J. Trump. That worries me almost as much as the virus itself does. And according to Lanier, that this kind of logic is encoded in social media. The truth value of something is not important. The number of eyes on something is important. That's the only metric that matters. And so social media is therefore completely undermining the value of truth in society. Very, very dangerous. Number 5, social media is making what you say meaningless. I've just got a quote from Lanier's book here. We've given up our connection to context. Social media mashes up meaning. Whatever you say will be contextualized and given meaning by the way algorithms, crowds of fake people who are actually algorithms mash it up with what other people say. Everything we say on social media is taken out of context because the context is applied by other people or by the platform itself or by the algorithms that work in the platform. We can't apply that context back. Therefore, what we say has no impact anymore. It's even stuff that is controversial and so on. It is just contextless and it disappears so quickly. The value of words themselves is undermined by the structure of social media itself. Everything is ephemeral. Most of it is fake. There's no value to anything said on these platforms, according to Lanier. Not in the same way that something that you might write or something that you might say in confidence to people would have a certain value and a certain context to what was happening. It's scary how, we know this through call-out culture. Somebody can say something many, many years before and it gets picked up years and years later, and all of a sudden there's a storm about it. And the context of when it was said, I'm not defending people who've made racist comments or sexist comments or anything like that. It's not my business to do that. And if you make those comments, you almost deserve what you get, as far as I'm concerned. But not all call-out culture is about things like that. And this idea that you can hoover up the past from people and make it apparent in that way is a very, very dangerous idea in many ways. And we decontextualize and recontextualize things on a daily basis to fit whatever aims we have at that point in time. So the meaning of what we say has been completely lost, and new meanings are continually being applied, and those meanings shift over time as well. It's a world where meaning has lost its meaning, and it's almost like a very postmodern sort of environment for information, which is not in itself a bad thing, but it all depends on how that's used. Argument number 6. This one is slightly controversial. Social media is destroying your capacity for empathy. Now, what Lanier is arguing here is that empathy is expressed in very different ways. Can you imagine if Wikipedia showed different versions of entries to each person on the basis of a secret data profile of that person? Pro-Trump visitors would see an article completely different from one shown to anti-Trump, etc., etc. Now, that might sound like a really bizarre system, but it's exactly what you see on your social media feeds. Content is chosen and ads are customized to you, and you don't know how much has been changed for you or why. This version of the world you're seeing is invisible to the people who misunderstand you, and vice versa. And what Lanier is saying here is that so powerful is the algorithmic governance of social media that it constructs a view of the world for us. We don't see people who have alternative views to us, and if we do see them, it's only in the context of us being able to shoot down those alternative views. And therefore, this construction of the world has really damaged our sense of empathy for other people in a very broad sense. We have no understanding of alternative views. We have no understanding of the problems that people might have if we don't have those problems ourselves. We have no kind of understanding of what it's like to be part of a different, different cultural group to the one that we are part of, because our social media feeds are dominated by the culture that we consume and enjoy. We don't see anything from outside of that. Therefore, any possibility of wider empathy with the community is very, very difficult. The effect of this is really going to be tested over the next few months. In order to ride out this crisis that we're all experiencing at the moment, we're going to have to show a huge amount of empathy towards people that we probably don't like very much. You know, Britain's become a very polarized society over the last 4 years. We're going to have to get over it. We genuinely are. We're going to have to work together with people that we maybe don't like very much. It's a challenge for all of us. It's going to be a challenge for me. It's going to be a real challenge for me. But I'm going to have to park my prejudices for the next few months, because in order to get through this crisis, we're going to have to leave this stuff behind. But social media is not going to change in that time. It's still going to tailor your view of the world based on these algorithmic profiles that it has of you. You're going to have to almost get over social media. You're going to have to reject what you see as your viewpoint of the world and just park it and say, right, everyone is equally valuable to everyone else. We're going to get through this together, because otherwise next few months could be disastrous if we don't take that approach. So maybe reducing social media use during this time might not be a bad thing. Number 7, social media is making you unhappy. Now, I've talked about this obviously in lecture 4. On average, social media usage is correlated very positively with insecurity, anhedonia, which means a lack of enjoyment in life, depression, and so on. And the more you use it, the worse it gets. There are a million bummer games going on all the time, and you're a loser in almost all of them because you're competing with the whole planet. What Lania says here is that, and we're all familiar with this, that we see other people's lives on social media, which are obviously heavily curated and heavily edited towards a particular viewpoint and a particular view of what their life is like. We can't compete with it, and it makes us unhappy. And we see this all the time. And the actual truth is, nobody's life is that perfect. It's a curation of that life for social media. And when we do it ourselves, we make other people happy as well. But if you don't feel like you have as much fun, beauty, sex, intelligence, popularity, influence, power of people around you, then you probably will feel very, very sad. And Bummer creates that. And it creates that sadness in us because it knows that it makes, sad people are more likely to use this system. It's almost like a paradoxical effect. Social media makes you sad, but then you use the system more because it makes you sad. It's a remarkable paradox that goes on within social media, but it's absolutely true. And even from personal experience, I know that when I'm feeling down or when I'm suffering from depression or whatever, I'm on social media all the time when that happens. I can barely put it down. When I'm happy and I'm well adjusted and things are going okay, I'm actually a really, really mild social media user. I'm hardly on it at all. Well, I know I'm in a really bad state mentally if I'm on Twitter a lot. It's a really good indicator to me. Social media doesn't want you to have economic dignity, argument 8. And of course, I've made this argument frequently in this module. Look at how rich bummer companies are, and remember that their wealth is made entirely of the data that you have given them for no money back. Bummer was originally sold as a barter deal. Let us spy on you, and in return you'll get free services. Might seem like a reasonable deal in the long term, but in the long run, reasonable deal in the short term. In the long run, this is a terrible deal. We have made people very, very rich, and we've got nothing back for it. We are not richer. In fact, many of us are actually, maybe not materially, but in terms of our mental health, our general well-being, we're worse off. So Lania's argument is, I won't have an account on Facebook, Google or Twitter until I can actually pay for it and unambiguously use and set the price for using my own data. If you were in the lecture, not this week, the week before, this is exactly what Alicia said would be the best way as an alternative to social media. And yeah, so she was spot on basically, and Lania makes this argument himself. So, tip of the hat to you, Alicia. You and Jerry and Lania are just like that, basically. Yeah. Number 9. Social media is making politics impossible. Trump, Brexit, democracy is being hacked. Yeah. Trump doesn't happen without social media. Brexit, it's still arguable. And the influence of the traditional media shouldn't be underestimated in Brexit, albeit social media was incredibly important. But definitely, Trump does not happen without social media. The idea of democracy being hacked, though, is a much, much bigger issue than this. We're familiar with Cambridge Analytica and their campaign of using Facebook to basically do a psychiatric or sort of special ops mission on users on social media to try and persuade them to vote in particular ways. Facebook's role in democracy is deeply, deeply problematic. Facebook will not censor fake political ads, will not censor fake political opinion. It's basically marching in line with Trump's re-election campaign on these issues. And of course, we have social media interference from Russia in almost certainly the 2016 Brexit election, and as we already know, definitely in the 2016 US election, and other elections that have happened since then as well. Social media is causing an active impediment to our democratic processes. No longer do we have valid forms of news and valid forms of information that we can trust, because our primary mode of finding out about the world is social media. And just as Lanny has argued previously, most of this stuff is fake. Yeah, and that's having a massively detrimental effect on our democracy. We are making democratic decisions based on lies, which is extremely problematic for democracy itself and the whole concept of democracy. You know, truth as a value no longer exists in democracy if our democracy is able to be hacked like this, and we are able to be targeted, you know, to be pushed in particular ways based on fake information. Basically, politics itself, the art of debate and reasoned debate, becomes impossible in the age of social media, because you cannot filter out the reasonable debate from the massive amount of noise and fakeness out there, which means democratic politics, at least, is virtually impossible. And his last argument, and it's a brilliant one to end on: social media hates your soul. It doesn't just hate you, it hates your soul. So Bummer is a new form of spirituality in which there is a new faith, a new way of seeing the world, a new criterion for truth, the notion of being viral or virality. New sacraments. The purpose of your life is now to optimize. You have been baptized. New religious absolutes. Facebook's statement of purpose includes the intention that every single person has a sense of purpose and community. What does that actually mean? Well, it means that sense of purpose and community means contributing to the Facebook community. A sense of purpose as a Facebook user that consumes and provides data for this organization. This spirituality of social media is completely devoid of any kind of morality, any kind of ethics, any kind of better purpose for our lives beyond being little hamsters running around in the wheel of social media. That's all the spirituality of social media is. Keep them on the platform, keep them doing things, keep them clicking, keep them liking, keep them posting, keep them doing this, keep them doing that, keep them active. No reflection, no spirituality, no sense of a higher purpose to our existence at any point in time. Frightening stuff. Therefore, we need to ask ourselves, are you going to delete your social media accounts after this? In fact, that's the question I want you to answer in the conclusion to your essay. So when you're doing your 2,000-word reflective essay, what I want you to consider right at the end is, in light of what you've done for your project, is your social media experience still a positive one? It might well be, and that's fine. And you can even drop Lanier into this and say, despite the arguments of Jan and Lanier, I find my social media experience a very positive one because of this, this, and this. But if you don't find it positive, I'd want you to reflect on some of these points that Jan and Lanier has made. Try and take some of them on board, and try and draw a conclusion about whether you think deleting social media might be a good thing for you. Must admit, last year, I mean, most people last year drew this out in their essays, and saw some really, really good sort of uses of Jaron Lanier's work in that time. But nobody said they were going to delete their social media accounts. Never occurred to anyone to do that. So you know, while Lanier makes these incredibly important points, and there's no doubt about it that he does, they didn't seem to break through with last year's group. I just want you to take them on board. You know, they're a very important set of arguments that we need to consider as social media users. And I hope at this stage of the module, right at the very end effectively for the teaching part now, one thing I hope more than anything that you've got out of this module is you've got more of a critical sense of what social media is and what your usage of social media is too. You know, social media is absolutely critical to our everyday existence. And the purpose of this module really is to try and understand what kind of culture it's made, but what kind of effect it's had on us as human beings and people. And the argument to delete social media because we could somehow be better people because of it is an extremely important one, and I want you to take that on board. Of course, you do also have to consider that despite the fact that I agree with virtually everything Jaron Lanier has said there, not all of it, but pretty much most of it, I'm still on social media. So, you know, you know, it's so integral to my professional life, my personal life, that getting rid of social media would be incredibly difficult for me. It would be an adjustment in my life that would be really hard to make. And I'm lazy. So, you know, I don't want to make big adjustments in my time of life. You know, I'm too old for that stuff now. Anyway, this is this is it. This is the last lecture, and of course, this is probably the last time I teach most of you guys ever, which is kind of weird and kind of depressing in some ways. It's been my pleasure. It's been my absolute pleasure to teach you guys over the last 2 years. And for those guys who are watching this, who are visiting students as well, it's been my pleasure to meet you. It's been really my pleasure to teach you guys. You've been great. It's such a shame that you know, has to end like this, you know, through this sort of virtual communication. But I just want to say thank you to all of you. You've been great students. It's been absolutely my pleasure and my thrill to work with you over the last 2 years, or even just over this module. You know, you're great. You're fantastic. Let's get through this crisis. Let's get you, you know, to where you deserve to be in life. And yeah, as always, if you've got any questions, you know how to get hold of me. Email me, hit the comments, or if you want to chat further, send me an email and we'll set up a Skype meeting. I will be back in touch, posting up a video for the home student second years at some point about your modules for the third year. I'm going to do a very quick video about that module selection thing next week sometime. But until then, if you've got anything you need, you know how to get hold of me. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you guys.